I wanted to make another AI video, and in this one, I wanted to see which classes were most needed by expansion to expansion in EverQuest. So AI being AI gave me suggestions for each expansion. And I wasn't going to make this video, but I thought it was actually quite interesting what it came up with. I had it scan the web, forums, Daybreak forums, websites, whatever it could get its hand on, because I have a paid version. And I made it search for the most popular in-demand classes or the best classes for each expansion. Classes that, according to the web and the resources it found, should be the most played classes. However, one of the classes that came up on the list is a class that has consistently the least amount of population, especially on the TLPs. And that got me thinking, is that class actually bad, or is it just not unique? Because I was looking at some of the classes I typically play and they all have like another purpose. So say take a monk, for example. A monk can pull, it can emergency tank, it can tank depending on the expansion, it feign death for split pulling, and it does a lot of melee damage. Now that's a lot of different utilities for the monk class. I know a lot of people that box them use them just for the damage, especially early on because they're just really easy to gear up and make. So you would think that of all the classes that it would pick, especially for the first few expansions, that you would see the monk. And the second thing it had to consider was, I don't think it quite put the necessary classes in, if that makes sense. Like obviously you need a tank, so you should see a tank in the top 5 for every expansion. I'm thinking what happened is it was able to examine current populations and trends and really come up with what there could be more of in some cases. And I really haven't got a great explanation for it, but I thought it would be interesting to show you what it actually came up with. Here's the article that is actually on my website, EverQuestGuides.com. It says, which classes were most needed in EverQuest, full ranking by expansion. So I had it do an end of day count. So 31 expansions, seems like a lot. You'll notice the cleric 31 times, no brainer, right? Rogue 31 times, shaman 19, warrior 16, and then it starts to split out. So according to what AI thinks is the most needed class in EverQuest, it's cleric, rogue, shaman, warrior, enchanter. That is combined over all 31 expansions. All right, so what we're looking at, everybody that watches my channel knows that I collect data pretty intensely, still weekly for going on 2 years now. The way that data is tracked is by specific servers. It used to be all servers. Now it's mainly popular servers, but I track individually by class. We can see the all live data, which is the green bar, which is what we're going to pay attention to. So this is all the live server class data combined. And you can see cleric at 6%, rogue at 5.52%. Those are the top 2 classes. You can see that wizard and monk are least desirable with berserker. And some of these data points are at various points in the expansion. The live data we'll use for this so that we're not comparing from expansion to expansion. Although I do have data for each expansion where I could examine the classes. What the AI says is not lining up with how this data turns out. As you can see on the live servers, magicians are actually the top class, followed by shadow knights and then shamans. So we can check that specific expansion and see if that even lines up. Going down to the closest live example it had, it would have been one of these 2 expansions. We got cleric, warrior, enchanter, shaman, rogue, cleric, shaman, necromancer, warrior, rogue. So as you can see, magicians are not even in this list. And I don't even know what magicians scored. I think probably early on they scored some. Well, that's actually interesting because magician has no score, which means that AI did not think at any point in time it was a needed class. And maybe that is because there were so many magicians on the servers already. As you could tell by live, it was a pretty high percentage. And if we look back at this graph, obviously when the servers are starting out, magicians are high. Mischief was past planes of power, but on these beginning servers, magicians are usually pretty far up. Cleric's absolutely necessary, and bards. So the thing with rogues, when I think about rogues, the last time I made a rogue, I think was on the Ragefire or Eridoon, one of the beginning TLPs. And what I did was, that was before they really heavily restricted Mac request. And on those TLPs, you could literally like 18 box off one computer. And that's what I was doing. So I had a rogue in each group, and I think it was maybe the Kunark expansion because the rogue epic was so easy to do, and I just did all 3. And thinking back, when those rogues engaged in combat, when they actually assisted the tank, the damage was noticeable. And thinking on my time on even Mischief during the Anguish, the Omens of War expansion, like everybody wanted to be berserkers. That's what I played, was berserker, and berserkers would top the charts a lot. However, if anybody played a rogue, which is rare, they were in the top 10 DPS for like a lot of the raid parses, unless it was like an melee fight. If you found somebody playing a rogue and they played it well and had the gear, they were up there in DPS. So when I think of it in that example, rogues are kind of boring. Till they get A, they got to strike from behind. I think later on they get some escape and other things where they can help pull. But a rogue is just, it's kind of a boring melee class that was positionally dependent. So I think it got skipped in a lot of multi-boxes, and I don't think a lot of people just got into it because really what you are is just DPS, where some of the other classes like monks do other things and wizards gather spells and ports. And I think it was too boring of a play style and too hard to box. So they were often overlooked. And thinking about what AI wrote in each section here, I think AI might actually be onto something. It may actually be correct as being the most needed class, especially if there are so many of all the other classes and not enough rogues. So if we just go expansion by expansion, we got cleric, warrior, and enchanter, no brainers. So it's right about those three. And then wizard, it says because of high burst damage. So okay, wizard for high burst damage makes the fights end quicker. And then obviously on the TLPs, that might not be a thing because melee got such a buff, especially with augs. But if you start thinking about the original classic EverQuest, we got no augs, got no innate melee abilities. I mean, casters were OP. But yet the rogue is on there. High single target DPS. And we go to Runes of Kunark. Now we're at cleric, monk, shaman, rogue, warrior. So we still have cleric and warrior in there. Now we got the monk in here, but we also have the rogue. It's now listed as reliable DPS. And shaman, obviously slow. I think the main characters I always box is a cleric, shaman, and warrior, like no matter what. Obviously the warrior could get replaced with Shadow Knight or other tanks further down the line. But those defensive abilities are just for absorbing the incoming damage when you're boxing. It was necessary. Scars of Alias, warrior, cleric, rogue, bard, enchanter. I remember my friend played a bard when Valius came out, and think about running through Western Waste and Eastern Waste with Celos and Levitate. And then they had a song that combined all those so you could be invisible, levitate, and run speed. Like that was necessary for some of those longer trips. Plus the resists were just, you really couldn't do without resists at some point. Bard is a standard staple of every boxing group I make. So even when I had the 3 rogues and 3 groups, every group had a bard. And then the Shadows of Lucklin, enchanter, cleric, monk, wizard, rogue, Planes of Power, cleric, warrior, bard, rogue, enchanter. Now in Planes of Power, after we got a lot of gear, Shadow Knights were like one of the most played classes I've seen, and we had a lot of Shadow Knights that would tank a lot of the mobs. But if you're not decked out in gear, obviously you're going to want a warrior for that type of job before things become trivial. And Rogue just continues to make the list. I don't consider Legacy of Yakisha, whatever the fuck it is. I don't consider that a real expansion, so you can skip that, but Rogue makes that list. Lost Dungeons of Noroth. I actually do remember playing with one of my friends that had a Rogue, and he did pretty good, but that went down the 5th. Gates of Discord. And we got the Beast Lord on Gates of Discord, not the Berserker, because I think in the original, the Berserker was that new class everybody wanted to play, but I remember it being not the greatest DPS until they buffed it the next expansion, but we still got Rogue on there again. And then Omens of War, where I actually remember raiding with rogues. They're on there. And here's Berserkers, which everybody wanted to play in Omens of War. We got Cleric, Warrior, Shaman. Dragons of Noroth. Cleric, Wizard, Shaman, Rogue, Monk. And as you can see, I don't know about the Druid and Depths of Dark Hollow. Maybe. Shadow Knight for sure. But Rogue. And we keep going. Rogue. It's like the 4th, 5th position for most needed classes. Rogue. So it never actually falls off the chart. It actually maintains 4th and 5th for the entirety of all the expansions according to AI. So I thought that was interesting. And at first glance, when it came back with Rogue, I was like, this is going to be shit if I actually try to make a video on this. And then I thought about it, and I think rogues get a lot of discredit because I didn't really put them in the groups even when I used to play one, because like we always had so many other things going on. Maybe we need some crowd control and some backup healing. But I think as a raw pure DPS class, especially on raids, and I didn't play some of the further long expansions, so maybe you guys can comment on this, but I honestly think it might actually be onto something. I don't know that you can go wrong playing a rogue. Yes, it's boring. Yes, it's not going to top the charts. Yes, it has like no other functions until later on when it gets to escape and can pull and stuff like that. But as far as providing what it says in all 31 instances, high burst or resistant, reliable DPS, I think it might be on. It might be onto something. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Rogue being in this list all 31 times. And if you're interested in seeing how the class data broke out with that image I showed you, check out this video.